Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest Elizabeth Owens. And she's here today to share with us her new book, Spirit Messages, Inspiring Stories about Mediumship and Experiences from the Other Side. Now, Elizabeth was certified as a medium in 1984 and ordained as a Spiritualist Minister in 1985. Since September of 2001, she's been appearing on radio shows and TV shows across the nation, promoting her books and talking about the other side. She has appeared on The Other Side, CNN, Hard Copy, Now It Can Be Told, A Current Affair, just to name a few. So let's welcome to the show Elizabeth Owens.
Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here.
Oh, what a joy it is to have you here. And my goodness, I loved your book. It was such a great book. It really felt like I could understand what you've been through and the road you've traveled. And I think it's important for a lot of people to hear that, because a lot of times they think, that if you're gifted, it's all rainbows and unicorns,
Yeah, well, not necessarily. Gifted people are humans, so right there you've got problems galore. So what can I say?
You have to have that human experience, right?
Yes. Oh, definitely. Yes.
Well, it was very beautifully written. And, I'd love for you to share with us a little bit about your path. When we kind of start to talk about, your childhood, because I think a lot of times people have questions, when someone's as gifted as you, have you always been gifted? Is it something that showed up later on in life? And so there's lots of questions that come with that.
Well, I think I was just the average, ordinary little girl growing up. I came up in the nation's capital, the metropolitan area, and had normal parents, and, we were middle class, that kind of thing. As a little girl, I do not remember having spirit visitations per se, or anything really traumatic or dramatic happening that I would say, oh, I had spirit visits, when I was little. But I do know when I started taking classes for psychic and mediumistic development, I started remembering feelings. The feelings that I was receiving at that time were very similar to back in my childhood. So I know something happened, but I don't have a recollection of it. I can imagine maybe my mother said, you're not seeing any dead people, don't you dare tell the neighbors that, kind of thing. Perhaps that happened, and I just blanked it out. I don't know. But it was more of a memory when I was in my 20s and so forth, that certain feeling that came upon me.
Well, and it's interesting, a lot of times, depending on our upbringing, and I'm preaching to the choir, but depending on our upbringing, we'll go ahead and shut down what's happening spiritually, because it just, we'll get parents that will say things like, oh, you didn't hear that, or that didn't happen, not really realizing the impact that they're making. And maybe it's just not time to have that gift opened up for us in such a profound way.
Well, parents do a disservice to people, or to children, I should say. I remember one time I owned a hair salon, maybe 15 years ago, something rather, and one of the ladies had a daughter, and she was like 13, perfect age, and she's having these visits, and she's saying things to her mother, and her mother is like, ooh, but she mentioned it to me knowing what I do and so forth. So I said to her, well, I can talk to her. I can explain things so she doesn't think something's wrong with her, or, whatever, just to make her feel better. And we never did have that discussion, because I don't think Mama wanted her to know anything. She just wanted her to completely forget whatever experience she had.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's doing a good service to the child.
Well, because a lot of times, they kind of get, this feeling of longing or stuck, or they repress things that come back later. And you're 100% right. It doesn't serve anybody.
No, I mean, if you understand something, then you aren't going to be afraid of it. And most people are afraid of the boogeyman, things that go bump in the dark, all that kind of thing. And, if they just understand, then I feel like there would be much less fear in the world. I like to educate people about as much about what a medium is as what a medium isn't, what Cassadiga Spiritualist Camp is as what it isn't. The isn't and the is, they're both important, so people have understanding, and then they can either accept or reject or go on their way, ignore, explore, whatever they want to do. But knowledge is so important, I feel.
Well, and to kind of piggyback on that, in your book you talk about the path to knowledge. And I'd love for you to share what you mean by that, because I think a lot of times people, especially when we talk about spirituality, they get a little confused.
Well, gosh, your path to knowledge, that's going to be so varied depending on the person, let's see.
I know it can be different for everybody, on finding their truth and their knowledge.
Well, yes, and even, this is going to sound funny too, maybe, but even within the spiritual realm, so to speak, you're going to have divisions. Some people are psychic. Some people are mediumistic. They're not the same thing. And a lot of people don't understand that. When I started out on my path to knowledge, I started out training as a psychic. And that's where you're using your mental capacities, your senses, your feelings. But it was a couple years later, after I'd had some experiences with spirits, whether I wanted them or not, they just kind of came and were there. Surprise, here I am, bang, bang on the door, and you open the door and there's nobody there. You start paying attention. So a couple years after the psychic training, I started really working into more the mediumistic field. And much later, I went to outskirts of London, Stansted, England, and studied at the Arthur Findlay School of Psychic Science. And so, my training, my path to the knowledge was varied, from a spiritualist community in Florida to going to another one in New York State, to going to London, and to learning and putting it all together for my own personal knowledge growth and how I would accept everything.
What a beautiful path that is, though, because I think a lot of people, when they're on their spiritual path, sometimes they feel like maybe it needs to be this profound thing, without realizing, we're just taking these human steps and we're moving forward, and and the spirituality looks different for everybody.
Well, certainly it does, and just because you see spirits, or you've heard spirits, or say you sense someone is around you, that doesn't mean that, I'm a professional, or, I should take this further. No, not necessarily. You can live in your normal, everyday life and be mediumistic, being sensitive to the spirit world. Doesn't mean you have to become a professional. Just means you utilize that ability for your own spiritual growth or your own protection. Say, if you get a warning not to go down that street in your vehicle, and then you find out later there was an accident kind of situation, you don't have to utilize it for anything but your own personal benefit.
Yeah. And I love that you talk about that, because a lot of times when people do start to see things, they forget that there's personal responsibility with what they see as well. You can't just, if you hear something, start telling people. You have to really kind of inquire if that's even something that you should be sharing.
That's very true. You don't want to do what we call sidewalk mediumship, where you walk up to somebody and you go, I just saw your father around you. Didn't he always wear a ball cap? Something like that. And, you could get somebody to take one of the melons and smash in your face, They didn't like hearing that in the middle of a grocery store, or it could upset them terribly, or who knows what. No, some things you can know it. You don't need to share it. Keep your mouth shut.
I agree with you because there's that discernment that has to come in place. And gosh, there was so much that I learned in your book. You talk about misuse of energy, and so I think this is kind of a nice way to kind of piggyback on what we're discussing right now. What would be some examples of that, and what have you seen in your life? As your experience, what has that shown you as far as that happening?
Well, I've had personal experience with that. A particular professional psychic purposely went into my dream state at night, and we were like, I'm trying to think, maybe 35, 40 miles away, and he went into my dream state, and all night long I was dreaming about this person. And he also did various other things where he wanted to know where I was, and I could feel his, fingers on the top of my head, like a big hand squeezing, and I don't know, odd little things like that. He tried to manipulate me, control me, more or less. I didn't even realize it at the time. It was kind of scary when I finally figured it out, but it took me being away from this person for me to be able to get my sense of self back. That is true misuse of abilities. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should be doing it to manipulate and control situations around you, certainly not controlling people. I mean, that is just deplorable behavior.
Yeah, that's not cool at all. I would think there would be some really karmic lessons tied into that at some point as well.
I would think so. I would hope so, actually, because, you just don't do that. There is so much, as you said, personal responsibility in this. And when you give a reading to someone, there's a little bit of karma going with that. You want to be guiding them perfectly as you can, because you don't want them to do something because you said it and then everything blows up. And then they come back at you and say, this happened, you were wrong, and you misled me, and, I haven't had anybody do that, but I would be devastated to think that I destroyed a part of a person's life. So you do have to be very careful. One example I'll give you that is so important, I can't emphasize enough. People, mediums, psychics, whoever, who predict death. Your husband is going to die. Your father is going to die. Blah, blah, blah. Horrible, horrible thing to do. And I can give you an example. I had a class many years ago, and this woman was attending my class. And she told me she had had a reading. I think it was a tarot reader or somebody or other that I didn't know, fortunately. And she said, that woman told me my husband was going to die within 6 months. And I was shocked because I was always trained you never, ever, ever do anything like predicting the death of anyone. And she said, I was so devastated, and I lived through hell for 6 months waiting for my husband to die. And he was fine, and he's lived on for years. It was no big deal with his health at all. But she went through all that trauma. And to me, that is putting a thought into that woman's head where she's almost helping to create that outcome. Because as we always say, thoughts are things. And when you think something and project it and work on it or worry about it even, you're just kind of giving it more power and emphasis to make it happen. It's kind of like, when we do chants or, affirmations, whatever, we're building an energy to make something we hope to happen. So if we're sitting there for 6 months worrying about the death of someone, what awful energy we're putting out to another person. So that is huge personal responsibility there. Never predict death. And if someone knows or feels like, oh, this woman is talking and I know her husband is probably going to pass because, say, she's told you they're very ill and so forth, and you get a real negative feeling, you still don't tell them. You say, well, just love your husband more. Spend more time with him. Make sure everything is in good order personally and financially. That sort of thing, so that they're a little prepared and they don't have regrets. But you don't say, yeah, he is going to die. No.
No. I mean, that would be like common sense for I think anybody. It's like you really have to have discernment when it comes to those kind of things. So thank you so much for talking about that, because, I think if someone was to hear that and they're not prepared, they wouldn't know what, they would just take it to heart like that person did and worry.
Right. They don't need to know that. There are some things you just don't share.
Yeah. Well, and I know that art has become a part of the work that you do. How did that incorporate into your spiritual work?
Well, I was always an artist. I remember drawing eyes when I was 3 years old. Mm-hmm. And that just kind of developed, and I drew horses and faces, mostly faces. The face always interests me. And even in high school, I took some art classes in high school. And portraits, that's all I ever wanted to do were faces. So I was a natural artist. I didn't go to school for it except high school, big deal. And a lot of people knew I had artistic ability. So one year, when I went for my annual astrology reading, this lovely lady said, well, you're a medium. Why don't you take your artistic ability and draw what you're seeing? And I thought, wow, what a good idea. So from there, I started drawing people's spirit guides, those entities that were around people. And I did it in pastel. I started with charcoal. I didn't like that medium at all. It was messy. So then I started into pastels and pastel pencils, and then I would give a whole story that went along with the particular spirit, when they lived, what their personality was like, and how they could help them and direct them and so forth. And that's kind of how that started. And it also bled over into going into working in oil painting, which I had done over the years for my own enjoyment and still do. And I started painting whatever spirit led me to paint on a canvas. And I've had art shows, and I've sold many paintings. So, it's a nice way of sharing the spirit world with people, I guess you could say.
Yeah, being able to have that physical piece that they can take with them. Because I know your spirit paintings, I mean, you have some very beautiful ones, and I'm sure they're very touching for the people you paint them for.
Yes, they are.
Yeah,
they have moved them very much, yes.
Mm-hmm. Having that deep connection. Well, and so when we talk about spirit and how you communicate with spirit, what does that look like when you get messages? Let's say you're maybe doing, with a group that you have messages for, maybe a private reading. What do those things look like? What can people expect?
Well, each medium works differently. Some people hear, some see, some feel, some smell. It's all pretty individual. So when I work in particular, I'm clairvoyant, so I see. Now, I don't literally see a spirit standing behind somebody, but I will see it in my mind's eye. Like if I were to ask you to imagine your cat in your mind, think about it, it would be kind of like seeing your cat in your mind, sort of thing. They start moving, doing things, and it gives me a sense of their personality. It'd be like watching a movie, so to speak, and as a person is moving around on the screen and you're getting a sense of, oh, this is a really energetic person. And you might even get a sense of what they sounded like. They had a gruff voice or something of that nature, or you might see them playing a piano and say they're musical. So that's the way it kind of comes over to me. Plus also the sense of feeling. When you see them moving and talking, you're sensing, you're feeling their personality and their ailment, maybe, if they had, let's say, rheumatoid arthritis or something, you might get a sense of, oh, man, my knee hurts. Now my elbow hurts, and then you might relay that I'm getting pain in my knee, my elbow. Did they have some sort of arthritic condition? So that's kind of the way I work, the way it comes through to me.
That sounds beautiful. I love that because it really is this deep connection with spirit. And then you're able to relay these beautiful messages to people where they get this real sense that their loved ones are there and they're making those connections personally too.
Yes. As long as the spirit is cooperative, it works that way. It's like when you're dealing with spirit, it's like dealing with people. If they cooperate, that's great. If not, okay, now back up,
Well, why don't you share with, I think, my goodness, we've covered so much, and I don't want to we can't even cover everything in your book because there's so much there. Why don't you share with us one of your, like your session experiences that you can share with us, from the book, just, messages that you've brought forth.
Okay. Well, let's see. I could talk about group messages. I've always liked doing group work where I have more than, well, not a group like of 50 people particularly, but more like I've got a couple sisters or really good friends. I find it interesting that a lot of times people will come who are related. Having a mother and two sisters is pretty normal, or even three sisters. Sometimes a brother will come. But it's funny, the men don't really come that often. It's more the women that will come to sessions like this.
And
if, let's see, it's helpful, in my opinion, if they are related. Because if you're talking about this one woman's mother, it means it's also the grandmother to the two women with her. So you're hitting everybody which is good because you don't want to leave anybody out, and you just cross your fingers all the spirits will come through that are necessary at that time, so everybody feels they were touched in some way. So if they're related, that does help that situation a little bit. I've read for people who, oh goodness, I'm trying to think of a good one. The two sisters were relating, and the mother was like, I don't know, well, kind of sounds like her, getting that kind of a reaction when, and the two sisters are going, yeah, Mom, that's Aunt Dora. Don't you know? Da-da-da-da-da. She wore this and that. Oh, yeah, okay. So it helps also for them, sometimes for them to get the message to begin with, especially if the woman isn't quite catching on to what's going on. Trying to think of some good stories to tell you.
Yeah, well, I find it fascinating when that does happen, because I've attended several different group readings, and when I've seen when that does happen, either right after the session has closed or as things are finishing up, people will often say, oh, yeah, that's so-and-so, or yeah, okay, now I remember. It's just that they're kind of in I don't know, a state of shock, or they're just trying to understand how this is possible. Maybe they're trying to make it possible with their mind,
Well, yes, that's really common, though, because I always joke with people and say, okay, now I want you to try to remember the impossible. Everybody you've ever known in your whole life, from your childhood up to now, who may be in spirit, and all those relatives you haven't met. And they look at me like, huh? And I said, because I don't have any control on this. Whoever comes through, comes through. And it could be your great-grandmother you never met, and it could be, anybody can come through. One time, it was really funny. Well, it wasn't funny, but the particular woman I had three ladies, but the woman in the center related when I said, I'm seeing a guy on a motorcycle, and I described him in depth and all this. And she's sitting there thinking, and then she goes, oh, wait a minute. And it was about 3 weeks before that, she had seen an auto accident with a motorcycle, and the gentleman had been killed right there on the corner. And I said, well, evidently he's here today. And she thought, wow, how bizarre. But that emphasizes how bizarre. You just don't know who's going to come through. Another time, this one lady was there, and this little child came in, and he was like sitting on the floor, and he had little overalls on and so forth. And I was talking about him, and she said, well, I'm not sure if that was for her or not, because there were other ladies there. But a few years ago, when I would be at work, I would look up, and there would be this little boy sitting in front of file cabinets on the floor, and he wore overalls, and he was the description I gave. And she said, and every once in a while I'd see him at home, too. He'd be underneath the table, just looking at me. And she thought, she said, well, that must be who this is. She said, but why did he come to me? Because he doesn't come to me anymore. And I said, because he needed you. He had lost his mama, and him, both of them, had died in an auto accident, and he was looking for you as his mother. And she thought that was so sweet. It made her feel good. She said that she was able to help him in some way just by sort of being there for the child, even though he was in spirit, and she wasn't exactly consoling him, but he kept coming around her because he needed her energy, I guess, her peace, her subtlety, her love. So you just never know what's going to come through. And then it can be a big-time relative that you're just dying to see, or not. Sometimes they come through and they don't want to see that person. So you just never know who's going to come through.
Well, and it's interesting. It might not be who we want, but maybe it's the person that we need, you know?
Well, the thing is, some people don't realize this, but we do this work for the spirits as well as the ones in the living. Mm-hmm. That spirit needs to come through and maybe say thank you or I'm sorry, whatever the message may be. And whether you want them there or not, you might say, I'm there for the spirit in this case to help them too.
Yeah.
So it goes both ways.
Well, do you know, my goodness, Elizabeth, we can talk all day. You are so amazingly gifted, and I love your book, Spirit Messages. I felt it was just a really great piece of work and helped people not only to understand what people who are gifted like you walk through, but also what to kind of expect, and it was really educational in many ways. Where can people connect with you and learn more about your community?
Oh, well, you can go to 2 different ways to connect with me. Then go to my website, which is Elizabeth Owens, Owens with an S, .com, or they can go to, I'll have to spell this, Cassadaga, CASSADAGA, spiritualistcamp.org. And there are all kinds of interesting pages on the events in the Cassadaga community, lots of mediums there, just everything you can think of, the church services. I was pastor there for a total of 8 years. So there's a lot going on in that community. And then, of course, my website shows you my books and my paintings and anything that's coming up. So they can certainly learn a lot more.
Oh, without a doubt. And, of course, they can pick up your book, Spirit Messages, at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, indie bookstores, and all major retailers, which is really exciting. You know, Elizabeth, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. You've been a doll.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Elizabeth. It has been such a pleasure to spend this time with you and, of course, to talk about your new book, Spirit Messages. Now, Elizabeth's new book can be purchased on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie bookstores. And if you have any questions or want to see about some of the other things that she does, please reach out at her website, elizabethowens.com, for more information. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.